How's everyone doing? Good, good. Day 3? Is that where we are, Morgan? I lost count. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm Sherrod Davis. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of EcoMap Technologies. Here today to host this panel with some great friends and some experts on ecosystem building. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves in just a minute, but in terms of flow for this morning, I have a couple questions that I really want our panelists to dig into, but do expect to be able to open it up to the audience for a few questions, maybe with about 5 to 10 minutes left. And so let's start with Morgan Allen. Can you just briefly introduce yourself and give us one word that describes your approach to ecosystem building?
Well, hi all, I'm Morgan Allen. I serve as the Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Director for the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. We're your hosts, so welcome to the state. We're happy to have you here. You can read my full bio in the app, so I won't bore you so we can get to questions. But I think one word to describe our approach, it's accessible.
Chad?
Thank you. So my name is Chad Renando. I'm the chair for Gen Australia and also map and measure the innovation ecosystem in Australia, as well as doing some other place-based work. And one word that would describe me, I would say, is systematic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Overton. I'm the Director of Small Business Development and Entrepreneurship, the state of Kansas. And one word to describe ours, I would say ready. Ready.
Amazing. Chad, let's start with you. You're in a different geography. You're based in Australia. I was in the research session with you yesterday, so I'm sort of asking you to bring that lens to this conversation and asking Taylor and Morgan to bring that practitioner, boots on the ground lens. As you looked at ecosystem mapping in Queensland and Australia, what challenges did you encounter early on? And how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I got into mapping. I was running an innovation hub in Ipswich. In Australia, we had an investment, $1.1 billion in the ecosystem, and we just saw this explosion of innovation activity. And I was running one of the first innovation hubs fully owned and operated by a local government. And of course, as you do when you get into a new role, you think, surely everybody knows what they're doing, because I sure as heck don't. So I started calling around and trying to figure out, what am I? What is an innovation hub? Are there other innovation hubs? What does it all look like? And so I started collecting this information. And I realized that not everybody knew this. And so I started testing it with people. And so I started plonking stuff on a PowerPoint and then publishing that on a website. And of course, as soon as you publish, people are like, that's wrong. And I'm like, cool. And as soon as they say that, you start putting new stuff on there. And eventually, one of the things I realized, one of the things I've done not right is publishing thinking it has to be perfect. Whereas the map is not the outcome. The conversation is the outcome you're after. The map is only there to facilitate value. And so, yeah, eventually building that. And the other point I'll make as a mistake, and I'll pause, is when you do the mapping, understanding who's the custodian of the information, because data and maps have value and they can be weaponized. And also, is it yours to publish? So I've mapped things like the creative industries ecosystem, the female entrepreneurs ecosystem, the indigenous ecosystem. And being pale, male, ale-stale, white guy from America, those may not be my conversations to have. And so what you got to do is find partners where they can be the custodians. You support them from a technical perspective, but you let it be their voice, because if it's my voice, I'm just yet another explaining, what you already know.
Got it. What was that phrase? Male, pale, what was it?
Male, pale, ale, stale.
Okay, got it.
White guy from America.
I see. And Chad, can you talk a little bit about some of the conversations that the mapping generated and perhaps some of the outcomes as well?
Yeah, you bet. So one of the big things with MAP is people say, well, what bucket do you go into? Obviously, I've got a bit of an academic degree, because when I started this, I did my PhD on what is the contribution of innovation hubs to a holistic view of community resilience. Because doing the innovation hub, sidebar, I realized we were hurting as much as we were helping, and the inevitable outcome of innovation is create inequality. So when you start mapping, you need to understand what are those fuzzy lines around the ecosystem that you're doing. If I do the youth ecosystem, all of a sudden I see a bunch of schools and stuff I didn't see before. So if I do creative industries, I see art galleries and museums. And so when you do the map, what you're doing is you're declaring something that doesn't actually exist. It's this abstract concept. There's no such thing as an innovation hub. It's only this building that we all collectively agree together and say, well, that's a hub. And so it facilitates the conversation on what am I, what are you, and what am I to you, and what are you to me. But again, the map is only kind of the baseline, which then with the conversation says what is the value on top of the map. So you try and keep the map as pragmatic as possible, not judge, sort everything alphabetically, don't make one logo bigger than the other, make sure everybody's on it, so you can facilitate the conversation. It's only the starting point.
And Morgan, you use the word accessibility to describe your approach to ecosystem building. Can you talk a little bit about why you all at IEDC decided to invest in ecosystem mapping as one tool to support the ecosystem?
Yeah, so it all really goes back to COVID. During COVID, there were two people in our state's economic development office focused on entrepreneurship, myself and David Watkins, if you have a chance to meet him. And it was an absolute mess. We were getting phone calls asking for support. We didn't know who to send them to. And we had this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, there is nowhere that people can go to find these resources. Everything was living in our brains and in a stale Excel sheet that was immediately wrong a day later. So when we looked at ecosystem mapping and I met Sherrod, we were like, okay, so what does this mean? We need to be more than an Excel sheet. We need to be more than just an annual gathering or whatever. So we really intentionally looked at how to incorporate both Main Street and innovation businesses in the same space. We see these unnecessary silos of, okay, you're a sexy business, so you get all of the resources, all of the mentors, and that's just not how the world works, right? 99% of our small businesses in the state are small businesses. They're HVAC, they're local doctors' offices, they're pizza joints. We have a lot of pizza joints here. So we wanted to make sure that we intentionally had one place where all of those resources were available. But COVID-19 is really what kicked it off.
Thanks, Morgan. Taylor, from my perspective, it seems like you've done a great job in Kansas of aligning various agencies, various partners. Can you talk about your approach to that and how ecosystem mapping played a role in driving towards some of that alignment across multiple stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Kansas, what we saw is that there was a lot of ecosystem mapping going on in silos. Cities that went to National League of Cities received a grant and they would map it, and then it would sit in the Excel or wherever it would live. Unique agencies at the state level would start to position, hey, this is how you connect into when a new business is started. We'll send an email and then they'll know how to navigate. So that's why I use the word ready, because a lot of this was going on already without the true connection point and without the true intention behind it. So what we did was we came together and really just formalized it. We mobilized the individuals that were wanting to do ecosystem mapping. We positioned them with the tools, the resources, and everybody knows my favorite thing is funding. The funding to be able to sustain and come alongside and intentionally do this work with us.
Can I go rogue and ask Taylor a question?
Yes, please.
So you talk about silos, and everyone creates these maps, right? And they have such a strong sense of ownership, which is great. But this is something we experienced in Indiana as well. How do you inspire that sense of collaboration and saying, okay, yeah, it's great that you have your regional map, but we're all better when we move forward together. How are you're currently having those conversations? How is that going?
Yeah, so we actually did something a little wonky. We aligned under our tourism team. A lot of our regions within the state have really strong branding and ownership of who they are as the regions within Kansas. So we just aligned with how the tourism team was communicating with them, and we mobilized them in a space that they were already operating. Attraction. How are you attracting events, businesses, whatever it is, entrepreneurs, boomerangs, back to this, how do we do that? But then also, how do we give you that accountability so that when those things do arrive in your ecosystem, they're ready to go and they're ready to contribute. So that's really how we broke it down, is by using that tourism model. Yeah.
And Taylor, I'm just going to stick with you for a second. During our process, some gaps and some opportunities I think were revealed. Can you talk about some of those and also what you're doing in Kansas to address some of the gaps that I think illuminated during the process?
Yeah, so when I returned home, so I'm a boomerang as well. Majority of my professional career was spent on the West Coast. And so I knew how to move. I knew how to navigate all of these resources for small businesses. And so when I decided to move my family home, I was ready to go, and I was ready to change the state that made me and really positioned me to do this work. And I was hit with the really harsh reality that my home didn't have the infrastructure. Everyone talks about the ecosystem, building the ecosystem. What does that even mean? If you don't have the roads, the bridges, the stop signs, the dang CDFIs that are going to be able to be positioned within your ecosystem so that the entrepreneur can navigate that ecosystem. So I was not successful in my first year back at home. It was very public, it was very visible, and very necessary. So we really took a step back and said, what is the infrastructure we have to put in place to be able to have a strong ecosystem? What are the missing components? And as we have done our ecosystem mapping and conducted all of these exercises, it really just validated the gaps that we were already feeling. We're a very, very noticeable CDFI desert, and so that has been a focus of myself, my team, and our delegation that we have here. So how do we combat those gaps? Leveraging the visibility, the hyper visibility that we are creating through ecosystem mapping.
Chad, I want to dig into a little bit of your research as it relates to metrics and measuring ecosystem success. What are you seeing in the field right now, and how are you seeing that evolve over time in terms of this is a good, healthy ecosystem, this is one that's emerging? What type of metrics would you encourage people to start to look at?
That's a big question. And I might actually take a step back. When I think about when I started mapping, right, and it was exciting because it was new. There was a whole bunch of stuff. We had, in 2018, we had 15 to 20 innovation hubs start every single month in Australia. 50, 60% growth rate year on year. It was exciting. We were adding stuff in. And if you were to assess the success of an ecosystem, it could be is a quantity of stuff that are happening. Because you also understand what you're mapping. Are you mapping at the system level, which are your hubs and your programs and your policies? Or are you mapping at the organization or firm level? Or even more painful, are you mapping at the individual person level? And it's harder, it's more transient as you go down and costs more time. Also, the thing with mapping, as soon as you get the data, that data starts aging and it costs and you have to maintain it. And so what does that look like? What I found, though, is I'd go into a community, I would map, which that in itself can be extractive and painful. So I talk to you, who's probably volunteer, I get all your information, I put it in my report I'm getting paid for, and I sell that report back to you. It can be a very painful experience. Who would be the custodian of that conversation? And so that's where I started getting into this whole notion of collective impact. There's a organization called a backbone organization. I realized there's a missing species in the ecosystem. So when I talk about the success and the metrics in an ecosystem, it is that infrastructure. But one of the points, and I'll pause here, is I focus a lot more on the enabling conditions that create the impact in that community. Everybody talks about jobs. Everybody talks about investment. Yes, they're important. Problem is, if I go in a community looking for a job or investment, everything I see will lead to that. And when I stop looking, those things often stop. Whereas if I go the enabling conditions, of which mapping fits under one of them, which is clarity, but then you need connection, you then need capability and capacity, you need collaboration for purpose around focusing on certain things, you need advocacy and promotion. So when I think about successful ecosystems, that's what I'm mapping now, not necessarily the end artifacts.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And so I want to pivot to Morgan to talk a little bit about the Indiana scorecard, the impetus for that, what your plans are moving forward, and why that was important to roll out for the state.
Yeah, well, if you came here hoping for a secret sauce of how we measure impact for ecosystem development, I'm sorry, I don't have that for you. We're working on it. But when we looked at how we measure success, like it's great that we did all of this mapping. It's great that we have our navigator program. But like I have bosses and my bosses have bosses. So how do I justify continuing to invest in that? So we're looking at kind of the outcome metrics of a lot of that work. But as you all know, that's really, really hard to measure. Like, okay, was that connection fruitful? Okay, then I have to survey that person and I'll get it back. So before we go down that path, we really just wanted to inventory what data already exists and how can we leverage what's already available. So if you want to learn more about it, Aiden Batista is up here on my team. He manages our scorecard and he can nerd out with you about it. But we looked at census data, we looked at Bureau of Labor Statistics, we looked at SBA loan data, and just did an inventory and made that data accessible in one location. So the formula that we use for the quote-unquote final score is all based on Indiana priorities, so that's not going to be applicable to all of you. But it is publicly available. You can access it online. You can see the entire formula. You can see the analysis. And it was really important to us that we broke it down on a county-by-county basis. I don't know if you all have played around with data on the federal government website before, but whew, it doesn't typically break down to that local level. So that was a very intentional focus for us.
And just because you brought it up, Morgan, can you talk a little bit about the Ecosystem Navigator program, where that came from, where it's been successful, and also how you want to evolve it moving forward?
Yeah, so I've been working with Sherrod and EcoMap since 2021, 2022. It's been a long time. And one of our early conversations was, okay, like a website's cool, right? But in rural Indiana, a business owner that's 55 years old, they don't want to go to a website, and they don't want to call someone and talk to a bot. They just want to show up at an office or a library and talk to a human. So we have 10 what we call ecosystem navigators based around the state. Their entire job is to be an entrepreneur concierge. So they have the data in their brain. They're able to easily navigate the online resources. And it's someone comes to them and they just have a triage conversation of, okay, you say you want a grant, because we all know everyone comes to us and says, hey, I need a grant. So we dig in a little bit deeper and say, okay, what do you actually need? Like, what is the pain point that we're trying to solve? And then how can we best get you connected to that resource? In addition to the entrepreneur concierge services, something that's taken up a lot of their time, which has been surprising, is the ESO support as well, the Entrepreneur Support Organization support. Yeah. So we have found that in local communities, they don't know each other. Like, just because a chamber and a library exist in the same community doesn't mean they're talking to each other. So the Ecosystem Navigator has been very, very intentional about bringing those communities together to help have a substantive conversation about how to support entrepreneurs. As of a few months ago, last time I looked at the data, because I've been planning this, we have supported over 1,400 Hoosier entrepreneurs through that concierge service.
I want to jump in and ask you a question. So,
we're going so rogue.
Rhetorical.
Sherrod's like, what are we doing?
If you've ever had a conversation with us, you know this is on brand. But purely rhetorical. What you explained sounds a lot like the SBDC network and very duplicative. So how does that navigated with the Navigator program?
So Taylor knows the answer to this, which is why she's prompting. So Indiana, actually our SBDC program is hosted within state government, which is really unique. Primarily the SBDC networks are based in universities, like hosted by universities, and the regional offices are based in other universities. So we're unique in which our SBDC office is government hosted, and then our regional offices go out to local communities. So universities, a few chambers of commerce. But for the navigators, we're like, we do not need one more front door for an entrepreneur to walk through. Our SBDC is about 100 people. It's very recognized. People know that that's a trusted place to go. So we embedded our ecosystem navigators within the SBDC network. It doesn't require the full government forms. It is just simply like a cooperating agreement, but it's just making sure that there is just one front door for people to go through in a community.
And I might just comment on that, and it's really good to hear the different examples. Like in Australia, we've got entrepreneur facilitators at the federal government level, which are no longer around. One of the challenges with government programs, sometimes those people are in the community and they get pulled and kind of that back and forth. In Queensland, in the state where I live, they have regional enablers. And it really highlights a conversation I was having just before the session started is one of the reasons why people map is because people are constantly coming to them asking for information, right? And you think, oh, if I just had a map, you wouldn't have to come to me, right? And then you create a map and they still come to you. And you're like, well, hey, because what you realize is that what they're after isn't necessarily the knowledge and information. And what's stopping them isn't because they can't find the information. It's because something in here is stopping them. And so they want, but what the map does is it allows them to get the transactional conversation done. So when they talk to you, it's the transformational. It's the concierge thing that you mentioned, which is a really great word and describes all you're doing is that facilitation. And the other aspect, when you talk about a measurement, when we were running the hub, one of the metrics I used is a speed factor. How many conversations, how many days, how much time does it take to get to a yes or a no? What is that? And you go to some really thriving ecosystems, it's like a factor of 1 or 2. 2 conversations, 2 coffees, bang, 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 I get to the next step. Some communities you go to, like, oh my God, 2 months later, I finally get a thing. And that concierge can help facilitate that. And the problem is if you don't have the map, if you don't have everything, that can really get bogged down because you can get full and it starts slowing down.
I'm going to keep going rogue. We are talking about ecosystem mapping a lot. I think 10 years ago when we looked at ecosystem mapping, it was an Excel sheet. What does ecosystem mapping mean to EcoMap? Like, what is your philosophy? How do you make sure that the data is fresh and that you can actually count on it as a resource?
Yeah, I think it's a really thoughtful question, Morgan. I want to go back to something that Chad said, which is trying to enable speed. And I really loved your framing of shifting from transactional to transformational conversations. That is what an ecosystem map, that is what EcoMap is trying to enable. We don't pretend to try to replace the navigators or the concierge, but we want to enable them, A, to have access to everything that exists within an ecosystem, and B, also enable the entrepreneur to have visibility so that they can have a more meaningful conversation, approaching it with a standardized set of resources and information, and creating that source of truth. So we use AI and machine learning to rapidly identify the assets that exist within an ecosystem, organize those assets, and keep those assets up to date. But we enable our customers in Indiana, in Kansas, et cetera, to go into the platform and make sure that they validated that data. We don't understand Indiana's ecosystem better than Morgan. We never will, but we want to give her the tools to get that information out into the world in the most efficient way possible. Are you running this panel?
No. Sorry, I'll take a back seat.
No, I love it. I love it. Let's keep vibing. You have something else? Yes, you do. What's your question?
So I can't help myself. I'm running the show. So AI, it's a hot topic, right?
Sure.
And it comes up in literally every session. I'm sorry. This isn't an AI conference, I promise. But with EcoMap, and particularly working with state governments, I have a conversation a lot. I don't know if you do too, Taylor, but it comes up a lot of, why are we using this? Why does this matter? And we talk a lot about scale. So can you just share a little bit more about the how you use AI?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we
Sherrod's
have been
what?
we have been using this type of technology for a very long time, since before AI was super hot. Of course, now that technology is advancing, we're using more modernized tools in order to make ourselves at EcoMap more efficient, in order to make our customers more efficient. And so it's a low volume based approach because we are looking at localized data, which I think is really interesting and unique because there are a number of tools that can go out and get a bunch of stuff. from over the internet, but it's about applying both our ecosystem data architecture and paradigm. I can talk a little bit about that, which essentially identifies not only the organization, but also what those organizations do. And so we're able to distill down into, here's the program that this organization hosts, here's the resource, et cetera. And so we don't tell an entrepreneur, go talk to IEDC, because IEDC has 50, 100 different types of resources for that entrepreneur. What we're trying to do is get that entrepreneur to the right resource at the right time, and that requires going a layer deeper than just mapping the organization. And so using some different techniques to be able to do that, and also introducing more dynamic data assets into our architecture as well, things like events, news. Morgan has something exciting coming out around RFP bids and opportunities as well. So it's about centralizing the activities and opportunities that exist within an ecosystem.
I might just one further question. I know we want to get to the audience ones. With AI, it's great. Really appreciate it. One of the challenges, though, when you map, there's a real risk that you're embedding the systemic disadvantage in community into the map. All I have to do is not map a community, and I will make them disappear. And they'll be gone, just like what Levinas calls the other, of those things in our society that we don't see. And which is one of the reasons why we've pivoted into more of a holistic place-based approach, because we were mapping entrepreneur ecosystems, innovation ecosystems, and I was missing entire swaths of community services that would help entrepreneurs that we don't consider as contributing. So if we do use AI, which I agree is an amazing tool, just make sure that it has that human intervention to do the checks and balances, to make sure that it's drawing from a rich data pool, that it doesn't replicate the bias that's already in our society. How do you experience that, and Keen from others on the panel, as far as how we ensure that we're mapping the other, which we ourselves may overlook?
I think it's a great question, Chad. And to be clear, the way we approach this is using a three-pronged approach. So we use our technology, and what we say is we are trying to get our customers 80 to 90% of the way there from a coverage standpoint. But that 10 to 20% is critical and really important. And so what we do is we enable our customers with an interface to add their own data, right there, boots on the ground, understanding what is happening in Indiana, in Kansas, et cetera. And then an end user of the platform can also come and participate by adding their own resource, their events, et cetera. And so it's really about enabling engagement across the full scope of the ecosystem, and just creating a tool by which people can do that more easily to, I think, address what you just brought up, Chad.
Well, and as an ecosystem builder, before you even get to EcoMap, the data mapping that you request matters. So when we did our initial request of okay, we want 4,000 max resources to start, and we want co-working space, innovation hubs, venture capital firms, you're missing out on the majority of people, to your point. So it was very intentional for us of, okay, I want the K through 12 schools. I want the public libraries included. Something that we're currently trying to figure out, and we'll work with EcoMap on, we didn't include churches. And up in Northwest Indiana, our church community is huge in entrepreneur support. So yes, you have to have that human intervention, and the data that you're requesting on your map really, really matters. We went so rogue, and we have 15 minutes left. Did you have any other important questions?
I do.
Sorry.
No, you're good, Morgan. Taylor, I want you to talk a little bit about the ESO maturity model. Where that came from, why it's important in Kansas, how it fits in with the overall strategy, and then we'll open it up to the audience for some questions and try to engage a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of our ESOs in the state, I call my giants. They have done this work, and they've come before me, and so many of the things that they have done inform the work that I do today and will continue to do. And what I noticed is that we were making assumptions of their capacity, assumptions of their ability to take on grant funding, their ability to understand different government resources, whatever it might be, and then also the way that we engaged with them. So what we created was a practical framework in an Excel template I love free stuff, but it's a free just resource. If you don't have the fancy frills, you can identify across 12 dimensions the maturity level of an ESO, and it's created to prepare them for their first audit, essentially. So when we're requesting audited financials, how do we show them what we want them to focus on? Is it organizational structure? Is it, whatever it might be? So that's really how we're doing that, and ensuring that when we deploy grant funds out to an ESO, they have to be at an established or leading level. Those are the top two levels, and it's working really well. We've removed that assumption of, all ESOs are created equal. All ESOs are training on and facilitating the right information to our entrepreneurs. We're removing that assumption, and it's protected a lot of the ESOs within our network.
Thanks, Taylor. And just speaking of free resources, we have some here. If you scan the QR code, there's some ecosystem mapping templates. We're also doing an ecosystem intelligence survey. We'd love for you to participate in that as well. We'll publish those results. Okay. Any questions from the audience? We've got about 10 minutes left from our experts here, Taylor, Chad, and Morgan. I'm not taking questions. I'm kidding. Yes, just go ahead. Okay, great.
Yes. Okay. So you guys were talking a little bit earlier about the human input on the EcoMap. I'm wondering where, so for context for everybody, I'm Western Kansas. So when people think of Kansas, they think of Kansas City, they think of Wichita, they think of Topeka. I am like 3 hours from all of those at least. So when you guys are mapping the ecosystem in more rural areas, even past something like Hayes, which is a 25,000 community, right, population, in those way smaller communities, how are you getting participation for that kind of thing when the ecosystem that's in place, if it's even an ecosystem, is really kind of sporadic? It's people just know each other and maybe help each other informally. How do we get that data?
You show up and you invite people to the table. So something we did before we launched our ecosystem map, we hit the road. And we tested. We gave people a sneak peek at what that actually looks like, so they felt invited to the table. And that wasn't just like a chamber of commerce. It was the library. It was Joe that owns the bar where people go and they just vent about all of their business woes. But it's very intentionally showing up and inviting those people to join you, and not making, to Taylor's point, the assumption that everyone will be like the really put together, nice chamber of commerce, right? It's going to be Tom's Bar, and that's okay.
We also have positioned technical assistants for specifically our certified development companies, our economic development districts. So their website, I have a few in the room, so you have a great website though. A few of them didn't have websites that were pulling in the information that we wanted. So as we were using the AI tool on their websites, they were like, that's not what we do, but that's what is shown online. And so they weren't quite understanding how the two played in. So, hey, let's get somebody to sit with you to work on your website. Hey, let's position you with technical assistance so you can receive some ongoing marketing support. So not just showing up and saying, hey, here's this thing I made for you, best of luck. How can we add value back to the organizations that are doing the work, and position them not just on the online platform, but position them with things that they were really wanting?
So I do most exclusively on populations around 5 to 50,000. I do map nationally, but then a lot of the work I do is around a 2-year place-based program called Ready Communities, where we do just with those size populations. And a couple of frameworks that might be helpful. One of them is I use a thing called actor network theory. And what you do is you break everything down to the roles and the functions. Like there's functions that happen across all community. In certain communities, those functions may be in the Chamber of Commerce. It may be in an innovation hub. You go to some places, and the church looks very much like an innovation hub. And so you take that lens of just saying, I wonder what functions are being done here. It is about showing up absolutely in the conversations. One of the other good ones I do is two frames. One is appreciative inquiry, where you say, what's working really well here? What could the future look like? What might that be? And how might you get there, and who might be involved? And then you start seeing organizations emerge. I also ask, if you want to do something new in the region, maybe you want to get new customers, use new technology, whatever that looks like for you, who would you go to? And you'll notice I didn't use the word startup, entrepreneur, ecosystem, use their language. And whoever they point to, that might be your keystone species, the kind of cross-connector. And the last one I'll do is there's 3 truths in community. This one's called critical realism. And those 3 truths are: 1, there's what the data shows, websites, statistics, government profiles, existing directories. 2 is what you're observing as a external, just looking around. And 3 is their lived experience. All 3 of those truths are absolute truths for them, and you present those truths back to them and say, here's what the data's saying, and here's what I'm seeing. But then the person taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, mate, let me tell you what's really going on. And so that kind of thinking framework when you go into community can help, I find.
I want to pull on a thread, because you said speak their language. This was something we were actually talking about last night, just the importance of being able to code switch if you're an ecosystem builder. Entrepreneur is such a scary word in my hometown of 250 people. If I say entrepreneur, they're like, that ain't me. Like, a farmer is not going to talk to me about his entrepreneurial journey. They are a small business. So being able to speak that language and go to Western Kansas and say, yeah, the work that Taylor's doing in the state government, which they already don't trust, on small business, that will make that connection much more fruitful.
Speaking of connection, I have a question now. So one thing that I've really learned from Morgan in our short time knowing each other is that collaboration over competition. And there are several ecosystem initiatives, like I mentioned, going on in our state. And so when you do have communities that are like, hey, I use this platform in this way, and I do it this is what we do, this is us. How have you navigated that? I know the answer, but I think that that's really important to talk on.
Yeah, we call it coopertition because we love a made-up word here. But coopertition, it's really great when we compete, right? Like, we all need to grow our population. We all want small businesses and entrepreneurs in our communities. So yeah, we're going to compete. That's just part of the game. But that cooperation is such an essential piece. And so when we started working on ecosystem mapping, I mean, there were 10, 15 different eco-maps out in the, or not eco-maps, but maps out in the field. Some of them were Excel sheets, some of them were platforms. And it goes back to showing up and just having a transparent conversation. Just saying like, hey, I'm the government, I'm here to help, doesn't work. So you have to show up and say, here's how I'm adding value to you, so that we can all cooperate together and then compete later.
Yes, we probably have time for 1 or 2 more.
Hi there. Universities can have a big impact in local ecosystems, but there's a lot of conversation on whether universities can teach entrepreneurship. So from a university standpoint, what do we need to do better to better support our local ecosystems, communities, and entrepreneurs?
That's a loaded one.
I know, right? And I love that. Thank you for that question. So I think that the first starting place is just aligning on terminology. And that was a big element of our launching EcoMap. What is technical assistance? What is an ecosystem? Who is a part of? And so defining those things, when we started conversations with University of Kansas, we thought we were talking the same language, but when I said, hey, how do we mobilize this cohort program of students for small businesses or entrepreneurs, we weren't speaking about the same thing at all. So they were saying, oh, yeah, we'll send them there to go shop. No. Do any of them want to do an internship? Do any of them, how do we position them in that way? So just ensuring that we were using the same terminology did a world of wonders. But then also aligning the things that we were hopeful for in outcomes. What is that university hopeful to do with their entrepreneurship initiatives? Who are they hopeful to train? I think that entrepreneurship is a great way to anchor students in a community and keep them there. So how do you show that investment and that commitment? But it really all starts with aligning between the public, private sector, philanthropic. What do all these things mean for all of us, and starting there?
One of the things we do in our communities is a 360, where we ask all roles to, what do you reckon about that other role contributing to this particular thing? So entrepreneur support is one of them, across different factors. And that can be really helpful to understand what other people think of you. So you can ask, like, what are we to you? But you really need to ask the people in your community, what am I to you and what are you to me, and how do we interact? It's the strength of the network. The map is the individual nodes, but we want the strength of the space between, which is goes into the maturity of the overall ecosystem. So that might be helpful of just facilitating either just in person having conversations, or, but again, what am I to you, what are you to me, but then testing it across everything from schools to universities to churches to all your major institutions to government, to really get that pragmatic. But then the other question is who's the custodian of that question? And if it's any one of the individual actors, it can be a bit fraught. So really ideally having that backbone that can help facilitate that could help.
And one of the biggest gaps I see every single day, I encounter every single day, is there are entrepreneur champions at universities, right? We have 3 R1 institutions in the state, and if you haven't been over to IU to meet Julie Heath, you should. She's an absolute rock star, my former boss. But what I found is, like, you have those champions, but then no one else within that institution knows what's going on. We encounter that so much. So it's great to go out and get plugged in with your community, make sure that they know what you're doing. But if people within your own system don't know what you're working on, that's where I see a lot of disconnect.
Can we talk about the bid mapping that we've done in Kansas? So there's a job tool in EcoMap that is phenomenal, but we didn't have a need for it in Kansas in the way that we were structuring our mapping to start. So we used it to map bid solicitations across the private sector, public sector, and then also provide an opportunity for entrepreneurs to post their own bids. So we're modeling that sort of supply chain interaction for those that might not be ready for it, or think they're ready for it, and also started facilitating purchases within our state. So that has been huge for us, where we're not thinking of that in the space of mapping. But if we can map those opportunities and keep those dollars hyper localized, that also facilitates trust. And so EcoMap allowed me to break the tool, like, hey, will it work? Can it do it? And Kevin's like, I'm not sure, but will you give me an option not to try? And no.
They never say no.
They don't.
They never say no. You should probably say no sometimes.
Yeah, no, but it was really dang cool. So really excited to see the ROI on that.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Can we give the amazing panelists a round of applause? Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Email Sherrod. You're not going to plug yourself, so I'll plug you.
Yeah.
Email Sherrod. His email is available behind us. They're an absolute phenomenal team to work with, so I would encourage you to reach out.
And if you want to talk to any of us about EcoMap further, please come see us. We are the champions of EcoMap, externally, not paid.